3 years back, my own boy and his wife told me to pack up, handed me $40 for gas, and said not to come around again. Now, out of the blue, he's on the phone saying they'd like to stop by my new place. But I can tell, it's not family on his mind. It's money. And this time, I'm not the same woman they tossed aside. The call came just as the sun was slipping behind Sarasota Bay. It had rained steady all afternoon, the kind that makes the water shine like silver. I was barefoot in my sunroom, flipping through the monthly papers from my rental houses. Everything was laid out neatly in front of me, pen resting on the top page. Then the screen lit up. David Carter. Nearly 3 years of silence, and suddenly there he was. I let it buzz a couple of times, then answered. "Hello, David Carter." "Mom," he said, his voice warm, maybe too warm. "It's been a while." "That's one way to say it," I replied. The pause that followed wasn't a thoughtful one. It was the kind where you're working up to a request. "I wanted to see how you've been," he went on. "Linda Moore and I thought we'd like to have you over. We're doing a barbecue this Saturday." In the background, I caught the low murmur of the television and Linda Moore's muffled voice. "You're inviting me to your house?" I asked, leaning back. "Yes, we thought it'd be nice to reconnect." Reconnect. That was a word I hadn't heard from him since before the day they told me I was too much trouble and slipped me $40 like it was kindness. "What's the occasion?" I asked. "No occasion, just family." "Family," I repeated softly, watching the rain trail down the glass. My mind jumped back to his driveway 2 years ago, my trunk stuffed full, Linda Moore watching from the doorway. "Saturday," I said slowly. "Who else will be there?" "Just us, maybe a neighbor or two." His tone was even, but I caught something under it. Tension, maybe urgency. "All right," I said. "I'll come." His relief was too quick. "Great, that's great, Mom. It'll be good to see you." "Sure," I answered and hung up before he could tack anything more onto it. The house fell quiet again except for the steady rain. I set the papers aside and stared out over the bay. The tide was low, seabirds bunched along the shoreline. 2 years without so much as a birthday card, and now suddenly they wanted me for burgers and potato salad. No, there was more to it than that. I moved into the kitchen, the smell of the morning's bread still faint in the air. The oak floors gleamed, the cabinets were white and bright. This was not the life I had when they set me packing. Back then, I had a beat-up car, one small suitcase, and a cheap motel key. Now, I had built something far different. I poured myself tea and thought about the call. He hadn't asked me about my health, my days, my life, nothing. Just an invitation without a hint of real concern. And after 71 years, I'd learned that when someone who cut you off comes knocking again, it's hardly ever from kindness. I sat back down with the reports, but my mind wasn't on numbers anymore. It was on David Carter and Linda Moore, and the way they'd looked at me in Jacksonville that day like I was a piece of clutter they needed to sweep out. If they wanted me there, I'd go, but I'd go on my terms. Back then, I'd been living in the little in-law suite out behind David Carter's house after my husband passed. It seemed sensible. They had plenty of space, and I kept to myself. I bought my own food, cleaned up after myself, and did all I could to stay out of the way. I thought it was fine. Looking back, maybe Linda Moore was storing up resentment all along. It all came to a head on a Tuesday. My washer in the suite had quit, so I brought my load into the laundry room. Linda Moore was on the phone in the kitchen, and she didn't see me at first. I'm always around, she was saying. We never have our own space, and she's got an opinion on everything. I froze, then stepped back, but she spotted me. Her voice stiffened. "Oh, hi, Margaret." "I didn't mean to overhear," I said softly. "Just came in to do some laundry." She crossed her arms. "This is exactly what I mean. You don't respect boundaries." Her words caught me off guard. "I'm sorry you feel that way. I thought I was being careful." We stood there in the kitchen, only the hum of the fridge between us. Her face was hard. "You give David Carter advice about things that aren't your business. Our bills, how we run the house, that's not your role." "I'm his mother," I said gently. "When I see him struggling, I can't just look away." Her eyes narrowed. "Well, it's causing problems, and it has to stop." I felt my stomach knot. "Are you saying you want me gone?" "I think it would be best for everyone." Just then, David Carter came in from the garage, rag in hand. He looked between us. "What's going on?" Linda Moore spoke up before I could. "We've decided it's time for your mom to find her own place." I waited for him to defend me. He didn't. He just sighed like he knew this was coming. "Mom, we appreciate all you've done, but Linda Moore's right. We need space." "Space," I echoed. "David Carter, I just lost your father the year before. I'm not asking for handouts. I buy my own food. I hardly step foot in the main house." "It's not about money," he said, though his voice told me otherwise. "We just need our own life." It felt like all the air drained out of the room. I had been living there nearly a year, helping with repairs, watching their dog, cooking when Linda Moore wouldn't, and now I was nothing but a burden. "I don't know where I'm supposed to go," I whispered. David Carter glanced at Linda Moore, then slid out his wallet. He pulled out a 25 and a 15. "This should get you settled for a few nights, gas or whatever you need." $30. It might as well have been 30 cents. I stared at the bills. "That's it?" I asked. "That's all we can spare right now," Linda Moore said, her tone smooth, almost cold. I took the money because, truth be told, my mind wasn't steady at that moment. My face burned hot and my hands trembled. "How soon do you want me out?" I asked. "Today would be best. That way we could all move on." It was only early afternoon. I walked back to my little in-law suite, shut the door, and sat down on the bed. My eyes moved over my things. Clothes still hanging in the closet, boxes of photo albums stacked in a corner, my old sewing machine resting on the table. I didn't own much, but the thought of packing all of it still weighed me down. I stuffed what I could into my worn Camry. The back seat was crammed with bags, the trunk filled with what I couldn't bear to leave. Last of all, I slid my sewing machine in, snug between two boxes. When everything was ready, I went back inside to say goodbye. David Carter sat in the living room pretending to scroll through his phone, never glancing my way. "I'll call when I get settled," I told him. "Okay, Mom," he muttered, eyes glued to the screen. Linda Moore stood in the kitchen doorway. "Drive safe," she said, like I was only running a quick errand. I walked outside. The driveway stretched out longer than I remembered. I climbed into the car, started the engine, and eased out slowly. Neither of them came to the window. I just drove, with no clear destination, only away from that house. The sky hung heavy with clouds, the kind that made afternoon look like evening. The $40 in my purse felt more like an insult than help. By the edge of town, I spotted the glowing sign of a budget motel, the kind with doors facing the parking lot and weekly rates tacked up on the wall. I pulled in, went to the little office, and asked about a room. $80 a night, but it's cheaper if you pay for the week up front. I counted out the bills, nearly every dollar David Carter had handed me. He pushed a key across the counter. Room 16. The room smelled faintly of cleaning spray and old air. The carpet was thin, the curtains flimsy, but there was a bed, a bathroom, and a lock. I set down my bags and sat on the mattress, the air conditioner humming the only company. That first night, I heated a can of soup in the small microwave and ate it slowly. I couldn't help but think how I had gone from having a home, a family, and a place at the table to sitting alone in a motel with $40 as my fresh start. I told myself I'd figure something out. I didn't know how, but I knew I wouldn't stay in that room forever. The days there crept by. I tried to pretend they were normal, but they weren't. Every morning, I made hot water in the little coffee maker, stirred in instant coffee, and spread peanut butter on bread. The bedspread was too thin, and the noise from the parking lot never quit. I pinched every penny I could. Soup, bread, peanut butter, and whatever cheap fruit I found at the corner store. That was my diet. I didn't have much appetite anyway. After that, the second week, I knew I needed work. I couldn't sit in that room just counting what I didn't have. I walked around asking for part-time jobs. Most doors closed before they opened. Finally, a small plant nursery about 5 miles away had a "Help Wanted" sign in the window. The owner, Anita, a sturdy woman in her 70s, looked me over and asked, "Can you lift bags of soil and handle the Florida heat?" "Yes," I answered right away. She paid in cash at the end of each week. It wasn't much, but enough for groceries and part of the motel bill. The work was steady, if simple. I came early, swept leaves from gravel paths, watered Anita's flowers, and unloaded deliveries. By afternoon, the sun burned hot enough to make my back ache, but I pressed on. That physical labor was almost a blessing. I didn't have the strength left for endless thoughts. Weeks blurred by. Work, motel, repeat. Now and then, I'd drive past David Carter's neighborhood. Not to see him, just to remind myself I was lighter without the weight of his disapproval. One afternoon in the motel lobby, flipping through the local paper, I spotted a tiny ad tucked in the back. Estate auction, waterfront duplex, as is, serious buyers only. It caught my eye. I'd always loved old houses, and the thought of owning one near the water seemed far-fetched, but I couldn't stop picturing it. I called the number and learned the auction was in 4 days. The home had belonged to an elderly man without close kin, the place sat empty, the estate eager for a quick sale. That night, I sat at the small motel desk going over my finances. I remembered the modest life insurance payout from my husband, the money I swore I'd only touch if I had no choice. By most standards, it wasn't much, but to me, it was the most I'd ever held in one place. The next morning, I drove to see it. The duplex was worn, its paint faded, yard overgrown, but right on a narrow waterway leading to the bay. I could see through the weeds and peeling paint. The bones were solid. Inside, it smelled musty, but not ruined. One half was livable, just tired floors, old wallpaper, and a leaky faucet. The other half bore water damage on the ceiling and a kitchen frozen in the 1960s. I stood in the empty living room, gazing out at the water, and for the first time in months, I felt something stir. Possibility. The day of the auction, I wore my plainest clothes. I didn't want anyone thinking I had money. The crowd was small, a few investors, a couple of curious neighbors. The bidding began low. I waited, letting others push the price higher, little by little. When the room quieted, I raised my hand. The number was still below what I'd feared. Another man countered. I matched him instantly. He paused, then backed out. "Sold," the auctioneer called. Just like that, it was mine. The price was low enough that I paid in full with the insurance money and still kept a small cushion for repairs. Within a week, I moved into one half. That first night, I lay on an air mattress, my few belongings stacked against the wall. Outside, the water was calm, catching the glow of the streetlights. It wasn't grand living, but it was mine. I kept working my shifts at the nursery during the day, and every free hour I had went straight into cleaning and fixing up the other side of that duplex. I scrubbed every wall, ripped out the old stained carpet, and painted until my arms felt like they'd fall off. I figured out how to patch drywall by watching online videos. Anita's boy, who worked as a handyman, taught me how to fix the pipes in exchange for a few home-cooked dinners. I bought secondhand appliances from a thrift store that carried pieces from estate sales. It took me 5 long months of steady work, but the day I planted a for rent sign in the yard, I felt a pride I hadn't known in years. Within a week, a retired couple signed the lease, just looking for a quiet place by the water. Their rent covered all my bills and left me with enough to finally start thinking ahead. I opened a savings account and put every extra dollar into it. I knew a single property wasn't the end. Living in that duplex, fixing it with my own hands, and cashing that first rent check, it changed me. I had gone from $40 in my purse to owning a house without owing a cent. I didn't mention it to David Carter or Linda Moore. They didn't need to know that I was building something better without them. From a cheap motel room to a home of my own with no debt, if you've ever had to start from scratch, you know what that feels like. And if you think starting over doesn't take courage, I'd like to hear why. Once the duplex was rented out and the couple had settled in, I kept moving forward. I still worked mornings at the nursery, but my afternoons went into fixing up my side of the house. I wasn't just keeping it livable, I was making it better. Every fresh coat of paint, every tightened faucet, every mended door gave me a little more control. Most of what I learned from videos and talking to folks at the hardware store. I practiced laying tile in the small bathroom. I replaced old cabinet handles, put up new light fixtures, and even repaired a section of rotted porch wood. When a job was too big, Anita's son would stop by and lend a hand. We worked out fair trades. I'd cook supper, bake fresh bread, or keep his repair shop in order, and in return, he'd handle the tougher repairs. That way, I didn't have to drain my savings on every little thing. When the opening year's rental money started adding up, I didn't touch it for myself. I opened a separate account and let it sit there. By the end's year, I had enough saved for a down payment on another house. I began looking at listings for distressed homes, not ones falling apart beyond hope, but places that had been left empty or where the owners were eager to sell fast. Houses most buyers skipped because they didn't want the trouble. That's how I found my next property, a little single-family house just outside downtown. It was solid, but neglected, with a yard gone wild and water stains from a leaky roof. The owner had inherited it, but lived out of state, and he was ready to let it go cheap just to stop paying taxes. I bought it outright with the rent money and a small bit of my savings. For 7 months, I worked on it every chance I got. I patched the roof, repainted the walls, and tore up the old carpets to reveal hardwood floors that only needed sanding and polish. When I listed it, a young family moved in almost right away. Within a year, their rent had paid back what I spent on repairs. After that, it was all profit. By then, I knew exactly how strong this path could be. Owning property without a mortgage meant I didn't live in fear. If one tenant moved out, the others kept things running. It became a cycle. Work, save, repair, rent. The fourth place came through a county auction. It was a small triplex that had been foreclosed on, in rough shape, but I'd seen worse. What sold me was the location, close to stores, buses, and a park. It took nearly 9 months of steady work to bring it back. I replaced shattered windows, updated the plumbing, and turned the smallest unit into a furnished rental. That one earned more than I'd expected, especially when tourists came through. By the time all 4 units were filled, I didn't think about money the same way anymore. My basics, my bills, and even a few extras were covered before the month even began. Everything else went into savings or improvements. 3 years after leaving that motel with $40 in my purse, I owned 4 properties outright. No mortgages, no credit cards, no car payments. My net worth had climbed into the millions. It was never about getting rich. It was about never being under someone's thumb again. That thought alone was enough to push me forward. With a steady income behind me, I began searching for a home that could truly be mine. I wanted a place where I could grow old, with space for a garden and a view of the water. That's when I found the old house on Sarasota Bay. It was a historic home from the 1910s with a broad front porch and tall windows that looked out over the water. The owners had kept it with care, but they were ready to downsize. The price was fair, and I didn't hesitate. I sold my side of the duplex to the retired couple who had been renting the other half. They had fallen in love with the spot and wanted the whole place. That sale gave me enough to buy the Bay house outright. Moving into that house felt like a quiet triumph. I furnished it simply, choosing pieces that were sturdy and comfortable. The kitchen had white cabinets and a farmhouse sink, just right for the kind of cooking I loved. The back porch became my favorite place. In the evenings, when the sun dipped low and turned the water golden, I'd sit out there and breathe easy. I still managed the rentals myself. I liked knowing who my tenants were and keeping a close watch on the properties. Twice a year, I walked through each one, handled the small fixes right away, and kept everything in shape. Good maintenance meant good renters, and the income was always more than enough to cover every need and surprise. I had savings accounts set aside for each property, along with an emergency fund and investments my banker had helped me arrange. I wasn't living in luxury, but I was living without fear. The same woman who had once stood in a motel room counting $40 like it was the last she'd ever see, now had the kind of financial independence most people never reach. I didn't post about it online. I didn't tell anyone I didn't trust. A few close friends knew, but otherwise, I kept it private. That privacy was worth more than showing off. What I didn't realize was that my quiet success had made its way back to David Carter and Linda Moore. And before long, they'd come knocking. Not to reconcile, but to try and take what they thought they still could. 3 days after David Carter's invitation, the phone rang again. This time the name on the screen wasn't his. It was Linda Moore. I let it ring a few times before I picked up. Hello? Linda Moore? Margaret, how are you? Her voice was bright, stretched thin like she was putting on a show. I'm fine, I said. What can I do for you? Oh, nothing in particular, she answered quickly. Just thought I'd check in since we'll be seeing you at the barbecue. How's everything down in Sarasota? I heard faint clinking in the background, like dishes being washed while she talked. That casual tone wasn't casual at all. It was a warm-up before she steered the talk somewhere else. It's been a challenging year, I answered slowly. I could almost feel her perk up on the other end. Oh, what happened? I kept my voice steady. The housing market took a turn. A couple of my rentals needed big repairs at the same time. You know how it goes. Expenses piling up. There was a pause. Oh, that's tough, she said, though her tone had shifted just enough. I've even thought about selling one of the properties to cover it all. Still deciding. This time the silence was longer. When she spoke again, the warmth was gone. Well, that's unfortunate. I know David Carter was looking forward to having you at the barbecue, but maybe this isn't the best time. Sounds like you've got a lot on your plate. I smiled to myself. Oh, I can still make it. A couple of hours away from paperwork won't hurt me. Are you sure? I mean, with everything going on? I'm sure, I said firmly. I'll be there. She didn't bother hiding her disappointment. All right, then. I'll tell David Carter. We'll see you Saturday. See you then, I said, ending the call before she had the chance to add more. I set the phone down and thought it over. Over 3 years without a word, and now suddenly they wanted me over. But the moment they thought I might be struggling, the excitement drained right out of Linda Moore's voice. That was the answer I had been looking for. I picked up the phone again, opened the recorder app, and made a note. Linda Moore called February 10th, reaction to financial trouble. I had gotten into the habit of keeping records like that, not out of spite, but because it was better to rely on proof than on memory. The next day, I replayed the call. You could hear the shift in her voice plain as day. She started out curious and bright, then cooled down the instant money came into the picture. It told me all I needed to know. That barbecue wasn't about family. It was about seeing what they could get from me. I wasn't surprised. I'd seen the same pattern before. Folks who once turn their backs suddenly find your number again when they think you've got something worth taking. But I wasn't the same woman I had been 2 years ago. Back then, I had $40 and no plan. Now, I had choices, resources, and the means to protect myself. That evening, I sat on the back porch, watching the sun sink over the bay, thinking about how to handle it. I wasn't about to confront them straight on. That never works with people convinced their motives are hidden. The better way was to let them show their hand, then decide what to do with it. I thought about calling David Carter, but I knew he'd try to smooth things over if he sensed I was suspicious. Linda Moore, though, she was more likely to let something slip if she felt in control. The test had gone better than I hoped. She hadn't just tipped her hand, she'd confirmed what I already suspected, that their sudden interest in me had everything to do with money. It reminded me of something my daddy used to say. If you want to know a person's priorities, watch how they treat you when you've got nothing to give them. The next morning, I carried on like nothing had happened. I checked one of my properties, met a plumber about a small repair, and had lunch at a little cafe in town. But all the while, I was already bracing for Saturday. I figured that barbecue would turn into some kind of pitch. Maybe a business idea, maybe a plea for a loan. I'd seen enough to know they'd wrap it up and talk about family. By Friday, I knew exactly how I'd handle it. I'd go, I'd listen, and I'd let them do all the talking. If money came up, I'd nod, ask a question or two, and never give a straight yes or no. Let them reveal themselves. That evening, I phoned an old friend in Jacksonville, someone who knew enough of the local gossip. I asked if she'd heard anything about David Carter's boat shop or Linda Moore's online decor business. She didn't hold back. The shop's been struggling, folks are complaining about delays, and that store Linda Moore runs, I've seen plenty of people online saying they never got what they ordered. I thanked her and asked nothing more. I didn't need to. I already had enough to know I wasn't imagining things. When I hung up, I looked at the small stack of notes I'd gathered. Dates, calls, little scraps of information. They were starting to paint a clear picture. Saturday couldn't come fast enough, and by the time it did, I knew I wasn't stepping into that barbecue blind. I had more than suspicions. I had reason. I wanted facts. There's a woman I've known for years named Sharon Blake. She used to work for the state as an investigator before retiring here. These days, she handles private cases, mostly background checks, fraud claims, and digging up records folks would rather keep hidden. I'd helped her once with a small property deal, so I knew she was trustworthy. That morning, I gave her a call. Sharon, I need you to look into something for me. Quietly. Her voice was steady, the same as always. Tell me what you want to know. I explained that I needed the full picture of David Carter and Linda Moore's financial and business dealings. Nothing shady on my part, just public records and whatever she could find through her contacts. She didn't press me for reasons. She understood that sometimes you need the facts before deciding what comes next. I can have a preliminary report in a few days, she said. Full details within a week. That works. Just make sure they don't hear about it. They won't, she promised. And I believed her. 3 days later, Sharon called back. "I've got enough for you to see the basics. Want me to still send the written report when it's ready?" "Yes," I said, "but tell me what you found so far." She began with David Carter. His little boat repair shop had been dragging for months. At first, it was just slow business, but then he started taking deposits from customers and using that money to pay other bills instead of doing the work. That led to delays, missed deadlines, and more angry clients. "Is he in debt?" I asked. "Deep," she answered. "And not just with suppliers. 3 customers are talking about suing. One already filed in small claims court. The others are waiting to see if he'll pay them back." I stayed quiet, letting her continue. Then she turned to Linda Moore. Her online luxury decor shop looked polished on the outside with a nice website and glossy pictures, but much of it was smoke and mirrors. Many items weren't even in her inventory. People paid and either never got what they ordered or received something cheaper and completely different. There are at least nearly 20 complaints with the Better Business Bureau and more on social media. She's been ignoring most of them, even blocking folks who post bad reviews. "Has anyone sued her yet?" I asked. "Not yet, but it's close. Some customers are banding together, and at least 3 vendors are threatening lawsuits over unpaid invoices." It didn't shock me, but having it confirmed sharpened the edges. I'd been right to trust my gut. "Between the 2 of them," she went on, "they're in a bad spot. If either one loses a case, they'll have to sell off assets if they've even got enough to cover it." I leaned back, let out a long breath. "Thank you, Sharon. I'll want that written report the moment it's ready." "You'll have it in a few days," she said. Then added, "And Margaret, whatever they're about to ask you for, it's going to be big." After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table staring out at the water. What I felt wasn't anger. It was clarity. Their sudden interest in me had nothing to do with family. They were trying to solve their own problems, and they saw me as the solution. That night, I dug through my own records. I read articles about businesses caught doing the same things Linda Moore was doing. I pulled up small claims cases where contractors like David Carter were forced to pay deposits back with interest. It was all out there in plain sight for anyone willing to look. 2 days later, the full report arrived by courier. Sharon preferred paper for anything sensitive. Inside were copies of court filings, screenshots of complaints, business registrations showing unpaid fees, even photos of the shop and warehouse they worked from. The picture was clear. David Carter was juggling bills, hoping more customers would show up before his reputation collapsed. Linda Moore was still fishing for new sales while ignoring the ones she'd already cheated. Both of them were 1 bad month away from disaster. I read every page twice, then locked the folder in my desk. The next morning, I carried on as usual. Met with a 15-int about a repair, dropped a donation at the community center, had lunch with an old friend. But underneath, I was already planning. The barbecue was only days away, and I had choices to make. I could confront them head-on, or I could sit quiet, take notes, and use what I'd learned when the time was right. Part of me wanted to stay far away, but another part knew this was my chance to show them, without raising my voice, that I wasn't someone they could use anymore. By Friday evening, my mind was set. I wouldn't reveal what I knew. I'd let them talk, let them make their pitch, then decide my response. But one thing was sure. Whatever they thought they were walking me into, they were really walking into mine. By Saturday morning, I knew exactly what I meant to do. I wasn't just going to listen to their plans at that barbecue. I was going to make sure the people they'd wronged had their chance to be heard, too. The first step was finding the right legal help. I had a friend named Edward Lane, an attorney in Sarasota I'd known for years. We'd met at a fundraiser, and I'd always admired his no-nonsense way of working. I called him mid-morning. "Edward, I have a situation." "I'm listening," he said. I told him about David Carter's repair shop troubles, Linda Moore's decor business, and the folder Sharon had given me. I explained there were already customers and vendors talking about legal action. "What I need," I said, "is someone who can bring these people together. If they file as a group, they'll have real power." He didn't hesitate. "That's a class action suit," he said. "It's not quick, but if the evidence holds and the losses are clear, it could work." "Do you have contact information for any of these folks?" "I've got names, complaints, and a few phone numbers." Sharon had given me enough to get things rolling. "I'll draft a letter. We'll invite them to a meeting and see who's ready to move forward. If even half of what you've told me is true, they'll want in." When I hung up, I pulled the list from the folder and began making calls. At first, some people were wary, but once I explained I wasn't asking for money, only offering a chance to meet with a lawyer who could help, their tone softened. One man, a retired Navy mechanic, told me David Carter kept his boat for 7 months and never finished the repair. A woman from Clearwater said Linda Moore charged her over $500 for furniture that never arrived. Each account fit into the bigger picture. By late afternoon, more than a dozen folks had agreed to hear Edward out. He promised to meet them in person the following week. That was the legal side of the plan. But I knew Linda Moore's whole business depended on appearances. People trusted her because the website looked polished, and her social media painted her as a stylish, successful businesswoman. If that image cracked, the whole thing could collapse overnight. I thought about who might take this kind of story seriously. Not just a gossip column, but an investigation. That's when I remembered a reporter named Laura Benson. She had once written a series on local charity scams. Laura was known for checking her facts and refusing to let anyone slide. I found her email on the paper's website and wrote a short message. "Laura, I have verifiable records of a Sarasota-based online business taking thousands from customers without delivering. I also have direct contact with several victims. If this interests you, I can provide documentation. Margaret Collins." She replied within an hour. "This sounds worth pursuing. Can we meet tomorrow? Bring everything you've got." The next day, I met her at a quiet coffee shop near the paper's office. I gave her a slim folder, just enough to prove the story without overwhelming her. Inside were screenshots of complaints, vendor invoices stamped overdue, and the business registration with Linda Moore listed as the sole owner. She flipped through the papers, scribbling notes quickly. "If this all checks out, it's not just a local story, it's a warning to anyone shopping online." She asked if I'd connect her with the victims I'd spoken to. I agreed, as long as they were comfortable. Most had already said they'd speak publicly if it meant stopping Linda Moore from scamming others. By the end of our meeting, Laura had her plan. She'd verify every claim, gather on-the-record statements, and even give Linda Moore a chance to respond before publishing. She figured the piece could run by the weekend. "I hope it's ready by Saturday evening," I told her. "Why Saturday?" she asked. "Let's just say the timing will make an impression." I replied. That night, I sat at my desk, notebook open. On one page, I wrote, "Legal. Edward meets with customers within 10 days to organize suit." Media. Laura publishes exposé Saturday evening. Coordination was the key. If the lawsuit notice and the article went live together, David Carter and Linda Moore wouldn't have a chance to spin it. I called Edward again to confirm. He said preliminary notices could be ready for service by Saturday afternoon, provided I could arrange a process server. I told him I'd handle it. Next, I phoned Michael Turner, a retired sheriff's deputy I knew from a landlord group. These days, he worked as a process server. Quiet, quick and reliable. I need someone served with legal papers Saturday evening. At a private residence. Do it by the book, but I don't mind if there are a few witnesses. He chuckled. Sounds like you're making a point. I am, I said. We set it for 6:45 p.m., right in the middle of dinner. By Thursday, Laura had confirmed almost all the details. She'd spoken with several customers, gathered photos of undelivered products, and even tracked down 2 former vendors who were willing to go on record about unpaid bills. It's worse than I thought, she told me on the phone. She's been pulling this for at least a year. I'll have the story ready by Saturday night. Friday, I checked everything one last time. The process server was lined up. The article was scheduled for 8 p.m. The barbecue would be my stage, but the real audience was all those Linda Moore and David Carter had wronged. I wasn't nervous. I was ready. Some folks say revenge isn't worth it. I say accountability is priceless. If you agree, share this. If you think I should have just let it go, tell me why in the comments. I'm curious. I left my house on Sarasota Bay just after 5:30. The sun was still high, though the air carried that cooler edge the evenings bring. On the seat beside me sat a small gift box, neatly wrapped. Inside was nothing but tissue paper. It wasn't meant to be opened. It was meant to be noticed. Their neighborhood looked the same as ever. Tidy lawns, shining cars, and neighbors who kept up with everyone's business. I parked by the curb and carried the box up the driveway. Linda Moore answered the door, smile wide, though her eyes flickered with suspicion. Margaret, you made it. Come in. Thank you, I said, stepping inside. The smell of grilled meat drifted in from the backyard through the sliding glass doors. I could see a cluster of folks around the picnic table, some familiar, some not. I set the box down on the kitchen counter, right where it would be seen. David Carter walked in from outside, apron tied around his waist, his name stitched across the front. Mom, he said, giving me a quick hug. Glad you're here. Of course, I said. We headed out to the backyard where the table was set with burgers, potato salad, and baked beans. The talk began easy. Local happenings, who'd bought which house. I answered politely, though I could feel Linda Moore nudging the conversation toward more personal ground. By 7:45, dessert plates lingered on the table. That's when Linda Moore leaned in. You know, family's supposed to stick together, she said. When times get tough, you pull close. David Carter nodded. Exactly. We've been thinking maybe there's a way to join forces. You've done well in real estate, and we've got business know-how. If we pool our strengths... He kept talking about partnerships and opportunities, never once saying loan or investment. But I knew exactly what he was asking. At 7 sharp, I heard the gate click. Michael, the process server, came in wearing a plain shirt, a manila envelope in hand. His eyes found Linda Moore. Linda Moore, Edward? He asked. She blinked. Yes? You're being served. He stepped closer. This is for pending civil action from multiple clients of your online business. Please sign here to acknowledge receipt. The chatter died. Every head turned. Linda Moore's hand trembled as she took the papers. This must be a mistake, she stammered. It's all in the documents, Michael said in his steady, professional tone. You'll want to read them carefully. Have a good evening. Then he slipped out the gate. Linda Moore's face drained of color. She flipped through the pages, voice climbing. This is ridiculous. These people are lying. Before anyone could answer, David Carter's phone started buzzing. He glanced at the screen, frowning, then again and again. His jaw set as the messages poured in. "What's happening?" Linda Moore demanded. He didn't reply right away, just turned the screen toward her. "Look at this." The screen was flooded with social media alerts, comments, tags, direct messages, headlines already spreading. Local business owner accused of taking money, delivering nothing. Laura's article, right on schedule at 9. Thorough, factual, impossible to dismiss. She'd included quotes, photos, screenshots, everything tied to Linda Moore. Linda Moore scrolled wildly, her breath catching. "They used my name, my pictures. This'll ruin me." David Carter's face was tight. "They mentioned the boat shop, too. Some of my customers are in this." Around us, neighbors whispered. A few quietly excused themselves. Linda Moore turned to me. "Margaret, you have to help us. You know this isn't fair." I lifted my glass, took a slow sip. "You think this isn't fair?" "Mom," David Carter leaned closer. "We're family. We can figure this out together. You've got resources. You can help us fight." I set my glass down. "2 years ago, you handed me $40 and told me to get out of your house. No warning, no care where I'd go or how I'd manage. And now you expect me to fix this." Linda Moore's voice quivered. "That was different. We were under strain." "No, it was exactly what it looked like. You taught me the value of $40. Tonight, I'm teaching you the value of accountability." Neither spoke. I stood, went inside, and picked up the little gift box from the counter. Carrying it back out, I set it in front of them. "That's for you. It's empty as your promises were the day you sent me away." Linda Moore stared at it, still gripping the legal papers. David Carter looked at the ground. I didn't need to stay. I walked to the gate, feeling every eye on me. As I stepped into the driveway, I heard Linda Moore's sharp voice rising, accusing David Carter of keeping debts from her. The night air felt cooler than when I'd arrived. I got in my car, started the engine, and drove off without looking back. 3 years after that barbecue, my house is quiet in the best way. No sudden calls, no chaos. I brew my coffee, watch the bay, and thank God I kept records instead of grudges. The fallout came quick. Edward met with the victims and vendors. David Carter tried smoothing things over with a few refunds. But the word spread fast along the docks. By spring, complaints piled up. His liability insurance lapsed for non-payment. The state reviewed his license. He was suspended for 2 years, forced to work under supervision after that. Deposits had to be in a separate account, estimates in writing. He ended up taking a job at a marina upriver. Now he clocks in, follows a checklist, answers to a boss a third his age. I drove by once on my way to check a roof. He was sanding a hole beside a younger tech. He never saw me. I kept going. Linda Moore's fall was louder. Laura's article spread, copied, aired on TV. Customers compared stories. Vendors filed claims. She shut down her accounts, then erased them. Within months, the fancy car and staged furniture were gone. She settled with buyers through court plans. Others won liens and judgments. She moved into a small rental across town. People ask if I felt joy watching it. I didn't. What I felt was safe. There's a difference between revenge and protection. I chose protection. Records, dates, receipts, that's what saved me. If you're older like me, listen close. You don't have to shout to be strong. Paper is armor. 8 months later, David Carter called. He didn't ask for money, just time. We met for coffee in a busy spot. He admitted he'd been wrong, that pride had steered him. I listened. I said I heard him, but I also said trust isn't a light switch. It's a savings account. You build it with steady deposits. One apology doesn't fill it up. It's only a start. We agreed to small steps. No loans, no shared ventures. Holiday cards, short calls on birthdays. Sometimes that's all family can manage after a hard break. I can live with that. It isn't full healing, but it's peace. Life kept moving. I added a cottage near the marina to my rentals, then a duplex further north. I hire licensed trades for electric and roofing. Always get at least 4 bids for big jobs. Check permits. Keep reserves for every address. Pay taxes on time. Tenants get written leases and quick repairs. It's not glamorous, but it's steady, and steady keeps the lights on. The house on the bay has a little vegetable patch now. 3 mornings a week, I head over to the community garden. We plant tomatoes, peppers, and herbs. Part of the harvest goes straight to the food pantry. The rest we swap. Cuttings, recipes, jars of pickles. Every other month, I sit down with a notebook. I go over insurance, taxes, and upkeep. I don't chase the latest fads. I swap out old supply lines before they split. I schedule roof checks ahead of hurricane season. When a storm brews out in the Gulf, I stock water, pull in planters, and close the shutters. The bay rises, then drops back, like it always does. I don't hear much about Linda Moore anymore. She's working part-time in a home goods shop. The settlements get paid only because the judge keeps her on schedule. That's what an ending really looks like. Bills handled, not dodged, and silence on social media. Sometimes folks ask if I'd ever let David Carter and Linda Moore live here. The answer is no. This house isn't a trophy to win back after a hard spell. It's a boundary I've earned. I can share coffee. I can sit in the same pew on Sunday. I can pick up the phone when it rings. But the front door stays my line. On easy evenings, I walk along the water and count blessings. A tenant who renewed. A repair fixed before it failed. The day I bought flowers without checking my balance first. Those little things won't impress outsiders, but they built a life I trust. Do I wish the past had been different? Some days, yes, but wishing won't patch a roof or mend a heart. Work will. Boundaries will. $30 once tried to measure my worth. All it really measured was what they knew about love. I learned to keep receipts and back myself first. Family can be blood, but it can also be chosen. And chosen family shows up without needing a script. If tonight you're in a motel room or sitting in a quiet kitchen counting bills, start small. Make that one call you've been putting off. Gather one document. Fix one hinge. Slip $10 in an envelope with your name on it. Small steps stack into doors. Doors open into rooms. Rooms turn into homes. David Carter and I aren't who we used to be. We're polite, careful. We both know the cost of pretending. I can bless his effort without bankrolling his choices. That balance is new for me. 3 years later, peace doesn't look like a storybook ending. It looks like clean floors, neat files, and a pantry stocked with beans, rice, and coffee. It feels like holding my own house key and knowing exactly where it belongs.